I set out early that morning, just as the first light of dawn was cutting through the mist that hung low over the forest. The air was cool and damp, and the smell of wet earth mixed with pine was thick and heavy. I had been planning this hike for weeks, a solo trip into a remote stretch of the national forest, far off the beaten path where the trails were barely more than animal tracks. I wanted to be alone, to feel the quiet that comes from being deep in the woods with no one around for miles. My pack was light but well prepared, enough food and water for 2 days, a small first aid kit, a flashlight, a map, compass, and a knife. I wasn't taking any chances, even though I knew the area pretty well from previous trips. This time, I wanted to test myself, to see how far I could go without relying on marked trails or the GPS on my phone. The first few hours went smoothly. The forest was dense but not difficult to navigate. I moved steadily uphill, careful to watch my footing as the ground grew rocky and steep. The sunlight filtered through the tall trees, making patterns on the forest floor, and occasionally, a bird would call out somewhere overhead. Every now and then, I stopped to take a sip of water or check my map. My heart was steady. I felt confident. By midday, I had reached a small clearing near the top of a ridge. I sat down on a fallen log and took out my lunch, a sandwich and an apple, savoring the quiet around me. From this spot, I could see the tops of the distant hills rolling away into the horizon. The wind whispered softly through the branches, and the sun was warm on my skin. I felt calm, at peace. After eating, I folded up the map and started moving again, aiming to circle around the ridge and find a small creek that was marked on the map. I wanted to follow the creek downstream, hoping it would lead me back to a main trail several miles away. The trees thickened again, and the ground became wet and slippery as I made my way toward the water. That's when things started to feel off. The first sign was subtle, a quiet crunch underfoot, like dry leaves being stepped on. But I was alone, so it couldn't be anyone else. I stopped and listened carefully. The forest was still, except for the soft rustling of leaves and the distant call of a crow. I shrugged it off and kept moving. Then I noticed broken branches, snapped off at odd angles, and disturbed patches of ground. Something had been here recently, but it wasn't a deer or any small animal. The prints in the mud were too large and too human-shaped, but not quite like a person's footprints. They were deeper and irregular, as if someone or something heavy had walked clumsily through the mud. I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was just some hunters or hikers who had passed through a day or two ago. No reason to be scared. But my eyes kept scanning the trees, looking for movement, for any sign of life. The creek was finally within sight. A narrow ribbon of water, dark and cold, flowing over smooth stones. I crouched by the edge and filled my water bottle, drinking deeply. The cool water refreshed me, and I felt a little better. As I stood up, I heard something else. A soft, low sound, almost like a growl. It was far away but unmistakable. My stomach tightened. It wasn't an animal I knew. Coyotes or foxes made different noises. This was rougher, harsher. I took a deep breath and told myself it was probably a dog or some other animal. Still, I decided to move quickly, following the creek as planned, hoping to reach the main trail before nightfall. The forest around the creek was thick with brush and fallen logs. I had to duck under branches and step carefully over roots. My boots slipped once or twice on wet moss. The creek made a steady noise, a kind of rushing that covered up other sounds, which was good. It helped hide my own footsteps. After about an hour, the creek took a sharp bend, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. Just across the water on the opposite bank was a large pile of clothes. They looked dirty, old, and torn. I could see a jacket, a shirt, and a pair of pants tangled up in the branches of a fallen tree. I froze. The clothes didn't belong to me, and they looked like they'd been there for a while. But the idea that someone else had been here, possibly hurt or lost, made my skin crawl. I debated whether to cross the creek to check, but the water was deep and the bank on that side was steep and slippery. I decided to keep moving downstream, sticking to my original plan. If I found a trail or some sign of people, I could come back with help. The light was starting to fade. The forest was darker under the thick canopy, and shadows stretched long across the ground. I felt the pressure of time. I didn't want to be caught out here in the dark. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate crunching over dry leaves and twigs. They weren't fast, but they were steady. I stopped and turned quickly, shining my flashlight toward the sound. Nothing. The beam cut through the trees but only showed empty trunks and bushes. Still, the footsteps continued, always just behind me, never getting closer but never going away either. My heart began to race. I wasn't sure what I was hearing, but it was real, not in my head. I moved faster, stepping over roots and rocks, trying not to slip. The creek was still on my right, dark and rushing. The footsteps matched my pace exactly. I glanced behind again, and this time, I saw a figure. It was dark, shadowy, just a shape moving through the trees. Not running, just walking. I picked up the pace, breaking into a run. The figure did the same. Panic took over. I ran harder, my breath coming in short gasps. I wasn't thinking about where I was going, just away from that shape behind me. Suddenly, the creek widened into a small pool, and the bank rose sharply ahead. There was no way forward without climbing. I scrambled up the muddy slope, slipping once and catching myself on a root. My pack shifted and threatened to pull me down. At the top, I paused, panting and looking around for a place to hide. The forest was silent except for my heavy breathing and the soft rush of the creek below. The footsteps had stopped. I stayed still, heart pounding, waiting. After what felt like an eternity, I crept forward, moving cautiously along a ridge that overlooked the creek. The figure was gone, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but no signal. Of course, the sun had almost set by now. The sky outside the trees was a dull orange, fading to gray. I knew I had to find shelter and wait until morning. Trying to hike out in the dark was dangerous, especially with whoever or whatever had been following me. I found a cluster of trees where the ground was flat and cleared some leaves to set up my small emergency tarp. I tied it between two trees, enough to keep some rain off if it came. I sat down with my back against a tree trunk, knife in my hand, flashlight ready. The forest was quiet again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was near. Hours passed slowly. The stars came out, faint through the thick canopy. The night air grew cold and still. I heard nothing but the occasional hoot of an owl and the distant rush of the creek. Eventually, exhaustion took over. I fell asleep, or maybe just dozed with one eye open. At first light, I packed up and started moving again, sticking close to the ridge to avoid the thick brush by the creek. The forest seemed less threatening in daylight, though I still scanned constantly for signs of anything unusual. About 2 hours later, I found the trail I'd been hoping for. It was overgrown and barely visible, but clear enough to follow. Relief washed over me. I kept walking, moving steadily downhill, knowing the trail would lead me back to the ranger station in safety. When I finally saw the road and the small parking lot where my car was parked, I stopped and breathed deeply. I looked back at the forest edge, the dark line of trees stretching behind me, and felt a chill. I didn't know who or what had followed me that day, or why the clothes were left by the creek. Maybe it was someone lost, someone dangerous, or maybe just a hunter moving quietly through the woods. What mattered was that I had made it out. I locked my car doors and drove away slowly, glancing in the rearview mirror at the forest fading behind me. The woods were quiet again, but I knew I'd never forget the feeling of being watched and the footsteps that kept pace just out of sight. I wasn't looking for anything out of the ordinary that day, just a quiet solo hike into the backcountry, something I'd done countless times before. I'd taken off work early on a Friday, packed up the truck, and driven 3 hours into the mountains to reach the trailhead by mid-afternoon. The forecast looked good, clear skies, cold at night, but manageable. Late September always felt like a sweet spot in the Rockies. Fewer bugs, fewer people, and more peace. The plan was simple. I'd hike about 6 miles to a ridge I'd camped at once before. No official trail signs, but if you knew where to look, the route was clear enough. From the ridge, you could see a valley of golden aspens below, and to the west, a vast expanse of pine forest rolling toward distant snowcaps. It felt like being on the edge of something massive, wild, and untouched. I signed in at the trail registry. Nobody else had logged in that day. That comforted me. I like solitude. The trail climbed steadily through spruce and fir, and after the first hour, I passed the last fork that led to an official Forest Service campground. From here, the path became narrower and more rugged. Overgrown, muddy in places. Exactly what I wanted. That's when I saw them, boot prints. Big ones, deep, fresh, heading the same direction as me. They weren't mine. I stopped and looked back. My own prints were clearly smaller and straighter. The ones ahead were made by someone heavy, with a wider gait, maybe carrying a big pack. That in itself wasn't unusual. People hike this route even if it's not popular. But something about the prints stuck with me. It wasn't just that they were fresh. It was how they wandered. The trail was direct, but whoever left those tracks had veered off several times. You could see patches where they stepped out of the main path, wandered to the edge of the trees, then came back. Not like they were exploring, more like pacing. I kept walking. No sense in letting myself get weird about it. By 5 p.m., I reached the base of the ridge. There's a rocky incline that requires some light scrambling. Nothing dangerous, but steep enough to get your heart rate up. When I reached the top, I dropped my pack and looked around. Empty. No tent. No smoke. No gear. But the boot prints were still there, circling a flat spot that was perfect for camping. I followed them for a bit. They looped around the overlook, came right up to the cliff's edge, then back toward the treeline and vanished. I set up my tent near the cliff like I always did, facing west to watch the sunset. I didn't see or hear anyone. I boiled water for a dehydrated meal, ate while sitting on a boulder, then watched the light fade. The aspens in the valley below looked like fire, burnt orange and yellow, flickering in the wind. It was beautiful. I tried to relax, but something felt off, like I was being watched. Not constantly, not an oppressive feeling, just moments, a prickle on the back of the neck, a tightening in the chest that would pass just as fast as it came. I told myself it was the altitude, maybe dehydration, but then, just after nightfall, I saw the light, the faint glow way down in the trees, maybe a quarter-mile back on the trail. A white headlamp beam sweeping side to side. I stood up. The person wasn't moving forward, just pacing near the base of the ridge. I waited. After maybe 30 seconds, the light blinked out. No movement, no sound. I stayed standing for a long time, eyes straining. But nothing came. Eventually, I crawled into the tent. I didn't sleep well. The wind picked up after midnight, rattling the nylon and making the spruce trees creak. Every snap of a twig sounded like footsteps. I kept my knife beside me, not because I thought I'd need it, but because I didn't know what else to do. At one point, I thought I heard breathing, right outside the tent. A deep, slow exhale. I held my breath, waiting to hear it again. Nothing. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I remember is dawn light creeping into the tent. I got out, heart still pounding from whatever broken sleep I'd managed. The air was sharp and cold, frost on the fly sheet. I walked a slow circle around the camp. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Deep, fresh boot prints circling my tent. Twice. Not mine. Not the ones I'd seen the day before. These were closer together. Heavier. The same as before, but now they were here, on top of last night's frost. Made sometime between midnight and sunrise. I looked in every direction. Nothing moved. No birdsong yet. Just silence. I broke camp in record time. I didn't eat. Didn't make coffee. Just stuffed everything into my pack and started hiking. Fast. I kept looking behind me every few minutes, but the trail was still empty. The sun climbed, and eventually the tension started to lift. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe someone else had come up late and camped in the trees. Maybe they were weird about privacy. Maybe, but then I reached the point where the boot prints had first appeared the day before. They were gone. Not faded. Gone. Mine were still there, plain as day. But the other set, nothing. No prints heading back down. No prints turning off into the woods. Just vanished. That rattled me more than anything. I hiked the rest of the way without stopping. My legs burned. My back hurt. But I pushed until I saw the clearing and the trailhead sign. The parking lot was empty. My truck was the only vehicle there. No one had signed the logbook after me. I threw my pack in the bed, locked the doors, and drove. Didn't stop until I hit town. That was 3 years ago. I haven't been back to that ridge since. I still hike, still love the woods, but I stick to marked trails now. Camp near others. I don't chase solitude the way I used to, because sometimes when you think you're alone out there, you're not. And sometimes the people you meet in the wilderness aren't the kind you want to meet twice. I've been hiking all day through thick forest, far from any trails or signs of people. The kind of place where your boots sink into wet earth, and the only sounds are the rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. I was alone, carrying a light backpack, planning to camp somewhere deep in the woods for one night before heading back to the main trail the next day. By late afternoon, I found a small clearing surrounded by tall pine and fir trees. The ground was soft with moss and pine needles, and there was a little stream nearby that made a quiet, bubbling sound. It was perfect for setting up camp. Peaceful, private, and far enough from any path that no one would stumble on me. I unpacked quickly, pitched my small tent, laid out my sleeping bag, and made sure I had my flashlight and pocket knife within reach. I ate a simple dinner, some trail mix, a protein bar, and a few sips of water from my bottle. The sun was already low in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. As I cleaned up and packed away my food, I made sure to store everything in my bear canister and hung it from a tree branch away from my tent. I knew better than to keep food near me at night. Once everything was set, I crawled into my tent. The walls were thin nylon, but enough to keep the chill out. The air was cool and damp, smelling like pine and earth. The sounds of the forest started to settle, distant frogs, the soft breeze moving the branches, the faint drip of water from leaves after a light rain earlier that day. I closed my eyes, and after a while, I drifted off. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I suddenly woke up. It wasn't a sound or a sudden movement, but a feeling, a deep, unsettling sense that I was being watched. I opened my eyes carefully, not wanting to make any noise. Outside the tent, the forest was dark, almost black except for the faint glow of the moon filtering through the trees. And then I saw it. 2 green eyes, glowing in the dark, staring straight at me. They were about 20 feet away, just beyond the edge of the clearing. The eyes didn't blink or move at all. They were fixed on me, unblinking and unyielding. My heart slammed in my chest. I was frozen. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe too loudly. I just lay there, staring back at those eyes, trying to stay as still as possible. I didn't want to make the creature aware I was awake if it wasn't already. Minutes passed, 10, maybe more. Time felt stretched out, slow, like the weight of the forest was pressing down on me. The eyes never shifted, never blinked. They just stayed there, glowing like emerald fire in the blackness. I could barely make out a faint shape, the hint of a large animal's head, low to the ground, outlined against the darkness. After what felt like forever, the eyes slowly began to fade. Not suddenly, but gradually, like someone slowly dimming a light. And then, just like that, they were gone, vanished into the black forest, leaving only the soft sounds of night. I lay still for a long time after that, not wanting to move or make a sound. I kept my breathing slow and shallow, waiting to hear anything else, but the forest was quiet again, as if nothing had happened. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I drifted back to sleep, though it was a light, uneasy sleep, filled with the sounds of my own heartbeat and the rustling of the trees. Morning came, pale and misty. The sun rose slowly through the thick canopy, casting golden light onto the mossy ground. I stepped out of my tent, stretching and yawning, still feeling the tension from the night before. Curious and a little nervous, I started to look around the clearing. That's when I saw them. Large, fresh tracks pressed deeply into the soft earth around my campsite. The prints were unmistakable. They belonged to a cougar. There were several sets, one larger and two smaller. The large prints were probably the mother, and the smaller ones her cubs. The tracks showed they'd been circling the clearing, moving quietly and deliberately. They'd been there all night, close enough to watch me. I realized if I had moved suddenly or made a noise, I might have provoked them. And knowing what I know about cougars, that could have been deadly. I sat down heavily on a fallen log, the weight of what I just experienced sinking in. I had been so close to something wild and dangerous, and it had been patient, watching, waiting. Not aggressive, just curious or cautious, but still a predator with all the power and speed to attack if it wanted. The thought made my skin crawl. I carefully packed up my gear, making sure to move slowly and quietly, not wanting to disturb the area more than I had to. My mind was racing with everything that could have gone wrong. I kept replaying the moment I woke up, the green eyes in the dark, how I stayed frozen, and how lucky I was that the animal never lunged. I thought about how many people might underestimate the danger of camping alone in places like this. You read stories online, hear warnings, but until you feel that raw, primal fear, the presence of a top predator watching you from just yards away, it's hard to grasp. I was lucky that morning. The mother cougar with her cubs didn't see me as prey. Maybe they were more scared of me than I was of them. Or maybe they were just waiting for me to leave. As I made my way back through the forest, keeping my eyes and ears open, I felt different, more aware, more respectful of the wilderness and its secrets. That night in the woods taught me one thing clearly: nature doesn't care about your plans or your fears. It simply exists with its own rules and dangers. And when you're out there alone, you have to be ready to listen, watch, and most importantly, stay very, very still. I've hiked most of Southern California's well-known trails, but something about Big Bear always drew me back. Maybe it was the mix of elevation, clean air, and long stretches of pine forest where you could walk for hours without seeing another soul. That October weekend, I wanted solitude, a break, some time to let my brain breathe. I'd been working 2 jobs and barely sleeping. Something about the noise of daily life had become unbearable. Emails, phone calls, city traffic, even my own apartment. It all piled up into this low-grade hum of stress that followed me everywhere. So I drove out early on a Saturday morning, got to the trailhead for the Pine Knot Trail by 7 a.m., and parked in the chilly shade of the trees. I brought everything I thought I'd need: water, trail mix, jacket, headlamp, paper map, compass, and GPS. The plan was simple: hike Pine Knot out and back, maybe 6 to 7 hours total, depending on how often I stopped. There were no warnings, no closures. Weather was crisp and dry. All signs pointed to an easy day. The first few hours were perfect. I was alone but not lonely. The trail wove through tall pines and over soft dirt paths littered with gold and brown needles. The air was cool, clean, and sharp in my lungs. I kept a good pace and stopped for lunch a little before noon. Just some granola and jerky on a rock ledge that looked out over the valley. That was the last time I felt truly at ease. As I packed up, I spotted a side trail just to the left of where I'd stopped. It looked fairly well used, narrow but not overgrown, and seemed to slope gently downhill, following the curve of the ridge. My paper map didn't show it, but my GPS screen, a little outdated but usually reliable, registered a faint line that looked like it might reconnect with the main trail farther down. I figured it was either a service road or an old firebreak path. It seemed to be heading in the same general direction I wanted to go, and it looked like it would shave off a mile or 2. I told myself it was probably just an alternate loop that hadn't made it onto the newer maps. So I followed it. First, nothing seemed wrong. The trail was narrower, sure, but not difficult. I was weaving between trees, sometimes ducking under branches, but it was beautiful, quiet, and peaceful. After about 30 minutes, the terrain started to change. The path dipped more steeply, winding into a pocket of the forest I didn't recognize. The pine canopy thickened overhead, cutting out most of the sun. Still no sign of other hikers. I stopped and checked my GPS, but the signal had dropped completely. That's when the first real doubt crept in. I paused and took a deep breath. I told myself I'd just backtrack to the last known marker. But when I turned around and looked behind me, the trail seemed to have vanished. No distinct tread, no footprints, just pine needles and dry undergrowth in every direction. I walked a few paces back, looking for landmarks, anything to orient myself. But everything looked the same. Trees, rocks, shadows. It didn't take long before I admitted I was lost. Still, I didn't panic right away. I had a compass, and I knew if I could get myself heading west, I'd eventually hit the main road or a ranger-maintained trail. But the landscape was playing tricks on me. Slopes looked shallower than they were. Shadows seemed to bend in weird directions, and each time I picked a route that looked promising, I ended up blocked by thick brush or steep drop-offs. I checked the time. 2:18 p.m. Sunset wouldn't be until around 6:30, but light fades fast in a forest, especially under dense canopy. I tried to pick my way uphill, hoping to find a clearer vantage point, but the terrain was unrelenting. Thick brambles, loose soil, fallen branches. I stumbled more than once, scraping my hands and knees. My water bottle slipped out of my side pocket during one fall, rolled down a slope, and disappeared into the undergrowth. That's when my heartbeat started to pick up. I had maybe a liter left in the other bottle. Enough for a few hours, not much more. Then came the sound. At first, I thought it was just wind, but it wasn't steady. It was rhythmic. Came from behind me, a crack, crunch, pause, crunch, like footsteps. I froze, crouched down behind a fallen log, and listened. Silence. I waited a minute, two, nothing. I stood and kept moving, faster now, feeling more and more off balance. Not just physically, but mentally. Something about the silence of the forest was starting to get to me. Every twig snap sounded like it came from 10 feet away. I'd spin around and see nothing, but the feeling of being watched, it crept in slow and steady, like cold air under a door. I started talking to myself out loud. All right, keep calm. You're just off trail. You've got time. You've got gear. People hike off trail all the time and get out fine. But the forest didn't care. Around 4:15 p.m., I stumbled onto what looked like an old deer path. It was faint and barely more than a flattened line of leaves, but it headed west, which was good. I followed it. 10 minutes in, I spotted something that nearly made me shout with relief. An old wooden trail marker. Faded, cracked, and illegible, but definitely man-made. I stepped off the path to get a closer look. That's when I heard it again. A cough, not a loud one. Dry, soft, close. I stood dead still. My mind raced through possibilities. Another hiker? A hunter? Someone camping illegally? I waited. Nothing followed. No footsteps. No voice. Just that one single cough. I slowly backed away and started walking fast, then jogging. The adrenaline kicked in, sharp and pure. I wasn't just lost anymore. I was spooked. I didn't know why exactly. Could have been a harmless backpacker, but my gut screamed otherwise. I found what looked like an old fire road, flat, wide, and carved into the hillside. No tire tracks, but it was the first real sign of human infrastructure I'd seen in hours. I followed it. No idea where it led, but it had to go somewhere. I walked that road for what felt like forever. Light started to dim. The temperature dropped fast. I could see my breath. My legs ached. I passed no signs, no forks, no evidence of life. Just more trees. Finally, around 6:30, I rounded a bend and saw a structure through the trees. An old ranger station or fire watch cabin. Small, wooden, boarded-up windows and a tin roof. The place was abandoned, but there was a bench out front and a rusted fire road gate nearby. I collapsed onto the bench and just sat there, shivering, wiping sweat and grime from my face. I had made it out of the deep forest. I wasn't safe yet, but I was no longer completely lost. There was a note pinned to the door with duct tape. Emergency? Wait here. Patrol swings by at dusk. I looked at my watch. 6:41 p.m. I didn't know if that message was current or 5 years old, but it was something. I wrapped my jacket tighter, pulled on my headlamp, and waited. At 7:28, headlights appeared down the road. A patrol truck rolled up slowly, crunching over gravel. I stood and waved frantically. The driver, a middle-aged ranger with a gray beard, rolled down the window and called out, "You all right?" I laughed. I think I almost cried. I told him everything, how I veered off trail, lost signal, followed a path that didn't exist on any map, then heard something or someone following me. He let me into the cab, handed me a water bottle, and started driving back down toward the main trailhead. "You're lucky," he said. "You were maybe 3-4 miles off from Pine Knot. That side of the forest isn't maintained anymore. Used to be a ranger station down there, but it was decommissioned years ago. Trails got overgrown. People kept getting turned around. I asked if anyone else was out there. Campers, hunters, hikers." He shook his head. "Not officially, and anyone unofficial out there usually doesn't want to be found." He hesitated before continuing. "Few years back, someone went missing near where you were. Winter storm rolled in. He got caught out. They found his pack weeks later, but never found him." I didn't say anything. He glanced over at me. "Thing is," he said, "the area you got lost in, that trail you followed, it's not on any current map because technically, it doesn't exist anymore." I stared straight ahead, heart still thudding. I didn't tell him about the cough. I didn't tell him that I still had the sensation of being followed even as we drove away. But I felt it, all the way back to my car, even as I started the engine, even as I drove back into town and checked into a roadside motel. Even now, months later, when I close my eyes and picture those woods, I can still hear the silence after that cough. The kind of silence that tells you you're not alone, even if you want to be. About 3 years ago, I took a solo trip to southern Utah. I had just come off a long, stressful project at work, and I needed something quiet, something off the grid. I didn't want crowds or tour buses or any sort of forced social interaction. I wanted open space and silence, maybe too much silence in hindsight. I picked a remote slot canyon near Escalante. I'm not going to name it here, mostly out of respect for the land, and also because I'm not entirely comfortable recommending it to others, not after what happened. But it was one of those places that didn't show up on many maps, tucked behind BLM land with a small, weathered trailhead marker and nothing else for miles. You had to know it was there. The route was supposed to be a simple lollipop loop, down a dry wash into the canyon, follow the slots, then climb out and loop back around. Around 8 miles in total. I researched it online, read a few trip reports, and even called the local ranger office to ask about conditions. Everything checked out. No storms in the forecast, dry sand, stable rock. So I packed my day bag, plenty of water, first aid, GPS, headlamp, snacks, even a compact emergency bivvy just in case. I left a note on my dashboard with my route and time of return. Signed in at the trailhead register around 8:15 a.m. Weather was perfect. Mid-50s, sunny, not a cloud in the sky. The descent into the canyon was easy, quiet, beautiful, and completely devoid of other people. I couldn't have asked for better conditions. The wash narrowed slowly over the course of an hour, the canyon walls rising steadily on either side. Light filtered down in golden beams, bouncing off sandstone in warm shades of orange and red. Around 10 a.m., I hit the entrance to the slot. It was maybe 2 feet wide in some places. The walls rose about 50 feet straight up, smooth and twisted from centuries of water and wind erosion. I had to take off my pack and walk sideways through some of the tighter spots. It was peaceful in a strange way, just me and the rock. That's when the sound changed. I noticed it gradually at first. My footsteps, normally soft and absorbed by sand, echoed back at me, but not in a crisp, matching way. It was delayed, off by just a fraction of a second, like someone else was walking a beat behind me. I stopped. The echo didn't. It sounded like one more step landed behind me after I came to a halt. I turned around. Nothing. Just the winding, twisting passage behind me. Shadowed walls and silence. I figured maybe it was the acoustics, sound bouncing in weird ways. I'd read about that happening in tight canyon spaces. I took another few steps. Again, the echo felt strange. It wasn't even in sync, like two sets of feet walking with me, slightly out of rhythm. I stopped again, slower this time. This time, nothing followed. I stood there a moment, staring back the way I came, heart ticking a little faster. I reminded myself it was just sound. Weird rock acoustics, like how your voice can carry in a cave. That's all it was. I pressed on. The canyon twisted tighter, the walls so close I could touch both sides at once. I squeezed through a couple of tight spots, one of which had a strange, dark patch on the ground. Looked like burned soot or maybe old charcoal. Could have been from a fire, though I couldn't imagine who would have built one down there. Then I reached a wider pocket in the rock, a sort of bowl like a chamber in the slot, about 20 feet long and 12 feet wide. Sunlight trickled down through a slit overhead, but not enough to light the whole space. As I stepped into the chamber, I felt it again, like I wasn't alone. The silence was too heavy. My own breathing echoed louder than it should have. I took a few cautious steps forward, scanning the walls. One corner had some markings scratched into the sandstone, not petroglyphs, but more like crude initials. Someone had carved T.B. 1996, and underneath it, help. That made me pause. Help could mean anything, could have been a joke, or not. I heard something then, not an echo this time. A cough, dry, raspy, human, came from behind me, back in the narrow part I just passed through, about 30 feet away. I turned fast. Hello, I called out louder than I expected. Nothing. Is someone there? Still nothing. No voice, no footsteps, just that one dry cough hanging in my memory. I waited a solid minute, straining to hear anything. My ears were full of my own pulse. Then I started backing away slowly. I didn't want to run. Running made things worse in stories like this. Besides, if someone really was out there, I didn't want to provoke them. I climbed the next dry fall slowly, a 6-foot ledge with a good handhold. From the top, I looked back one last time, just the shadows curling down the slot. Then I saw it. A figure. A shadow, really. Not clearly defined, but there was definitely something. A shoulder, a head, peeking out from behind the sandstone curve where I'd come from. It wasn't moving, just there. I didn't call out this time. I moved, quietly, quickly. The canyon opened up again after another 100 yards. The walls dropped and I could see the sky above me. Relief washed over me like warm water. I practically jogged the next section, checking my GPS constantly until I found the trail that looped back out toward the rim. I didn't stop again. I got back to my car around 3:45 p.m., signed out of the register. My legs were dusty and shaky, but otherwise I felt fine. The whole drive back to the little motel I was staying in, I kept turning that moment over in my head. The cough, the shadow, the feeling of being watched. Couldn't shake it. That night, I sat in my motel room with the window cracked, listening to the wind blow through the cottonwoods. I finally called the local ranger office, not to report a crime or anything like that, but just to say, hey, I saw someone out there. I think they might have been camping illegally, or maybe they were lost. The ranger I spoke with listened carefully. When I mentioned which canyon, there was a pause. You were hiking that loop solo? Yeah, I said. Didn't see anyone all day until, well, maybe I didn't see anyone. I'm not sure. People see things out there sometimes, the ranger said, especially in those slots. Sound and shadow plays tricks. I agreed, said it must have been just that. But before we hung up, he added something else. There's been some talk over the years, he said. Not official reports, really. Just hikers saying they heard voices, saw figures where there shouldn't be anyone. It's never amounted to anything. But there was a missing person case back in 2001. Guy went hiking solo and never came out. That stuck with me. About a week later, I got a voicemail from the same ranger. He said a search and rescue team had gone to check the area, routine sweep. They do them every so often. About a half-mile from the rim, on a high shelf above the main slot, they found an old campsite. I called him back to ask about it. He said it was run down. Tent collapsed, fabric shredded, half buried under sand, a rusted cooking pot, empty cans, and a notebook. Most of it was ruined, but a few pages had legible writing. Not detailed journal entries, more like short thoughts. Confused ones. Things like, Day 6? Sun too hot. No one here. Heard someone walking again. Tried to find them. Can't climb out. Waited too long. Still hearing footsteps. And the last legible line, am I Echo or is Echo me? They never identified the person. No body, no ID, just traces. They assumed it was either the missing hiker from 2001 or someone else entirely who'd never been reported. I haven't hiked a slot canyon alone since then. I still hike, still love the desert, still trust the land. But I carry a satellite beacon now, and I never ignore those gut feelings anymore. There's something deeply lonely about being that far removed from the rest of the world. A canyon like that can swallow you up, body, mind, and even your sense of time. But what stays with me the most is how real it all felt. The cough, the echo, the shadow that didn't move, and the possibility, however slim, that someone might still be out there, lost in the maze of rock, waiting for someone else to make a wrong turn.